Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 13 of Outside the Letterbox. Today, I am joined by my friend and what would you call yourself, an animation aficionado, so to speak?
That's a pretty good term.
Anyway, my friend here is Ethan Snell. My usual co-hosts Nick and Joe have totally bailed on me for the rest of the time that I plan on running this site. No, I'm just kidding. But for right now, they've bailed on me. So Ethan and I are here today to talk to you about How to Train Your Dragon 2. That's all we're going to be talking about this week. We're going to skip the film news and recently watched portions of our normal podcast. But first, you can find more episodes of Outside the Letterbox on the-letterbox.com, as well as news and articles regarding film. You can also find us on iTunes by just searching for Outside the Letterbox. So anyway, without further ado, let's first talk about How to Train Your Dragon 1. Ethan, what did you think of How to Train Your Dragon?
Yeah, so How to Train Your Dragon has always been one of my favorite animated films. I mean, it was definitely one of my favorites from DreamWorks lineup, and I think one of the most.
Is that saying that much?
I mean, to be honest, that's not really saying that much, but it definitely captures like a spirit of like, I guess, awe and wonder that a lot of animated films today don't have. So it was pretty cool and definitely one of my favorite animated films from them.
Yeah, I love How to Train Your Dragon, the first film. It is my favorite animated movie, I am confident in saying.
Wow, that's pretty good praise.
I know. And I will probably continue to say that until, well, I guess that's giving away how I feel about How to Train Your Dragon 2. But I thought, honestly, while I love a lot of Pixar animated films and, a lot of classic animated films, you've got Beauty and the Beast. You've got one of my favorites.
A great one.
One of my favorites is actually Secret of Nim, which is really old. But they're great animated films. But there's something about How to Train Your Dragon that not only lets people get excited about a sequel for it, but also is filling the gap that I don't think Pixar is filling with its storytelling. While Pixar, I think, has really great one-offs, their sequels seem to be like almost forced in a way, The only movie that I think Pixar has made that lends itself really well to a sequel is something like The Incredibles, and that's the one that they haven't made yet.
That's pretty bold considering the Toy Story trilogy there.
Well, that's the thing though, is like that. While Toy Story sequels are great, I love Toy Story 2 actually. That's probably the least favorite of a lot of people's, but that's my favorite of the series. Like, They ended up making great sequels, but the story itself didn't necessarily lend itself to a sequel. How to Train Your Dragon sort of built a world around itself that felt like you wanted to know more about that world.
It deserves to have more.
Exactly. It was like it's like the introduction. It's kind of like Star Wars, like the first Star Wars movie, in the sense that you get introduced to this whole like science fiction / fantasy type world that you want to see more of. And technically How to Train Your Dragon is supposed to be like Vikings, like actual Vikings, but clearly they're not. I mean, they have like Scottish accents or whatever, which doesn't even necessarily make sense. But I think just the movie itself, I have to agree with you, totally has like a sense of awe and wonder, and those flight scenes, I've seen the movie probably 8 times, and every time those flight scenes like give me chills.
They definitely did something pretty incredible with those, and it's weird that we haven't seen something like that, because it seems like something that would be natural for animation almost in terms of that. I mean, the only movie that I can think of that's comparable to number one in that way is WALL-E.
Yeah, and I actually think the other one that I can think of is that does that to an extent is Up. Up has some really great sequences that really utilize the fact that it's an animated film to give you a sense of like even just the scenes where like the house is taking off and stuff like that are just really solid, visually striking scenes. But I think How to Train Your Dragon like that brought those visually striking scenes and turned them into like action scenes at the same time. Like the test drive scene in the first movie is so fantastic to watch, where you're like dodging through all the rocks and everything with Hiccup and Toothless is just excellent.
It just strikes me as kind of interesting because like the other movie that came out around that time was Avatar.
Oh yeah,
and which also did something similar to that. Like those fight scenes in Avatar are pretty incredible, despite what you think about the movie itself.
Mm-hmm.
But I really haven't seen anything like that recently.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Oh, I just wanted to point out another aspect of How to Train Your Dragon movie. The first one and the sequel. I don't want to spoil anything about the sequel, but is that it doesn't seem to. They don't seem to shy away. They are technically children's films. Like they are made for children, and you can tell by the animation style. I think you can tell by some of the jokes, but they don't necessarily shy away from, the actual physical and realistic. Maybe not so much emotional, but physical consequences of what's going on around them.
Yeah, and that's definitely something that I'd say is another thing that makes How to Train Your Dragon for me. And to a certain extent, the sequel, a lot more of a interesting film compared to a lot of other stuff. And it's actually interesting because DreamWorks traditionally doesn't. That's something that at other DreamWorks films is very, very not there.
Exactly.
But How to Train Your Dragon has that.
That's and this is like I think specifically what we're speaking about for the first movie. And this is a spoiler alert for a movie that's 4 years old at this point, where Hiccup loses his leg at the end of the movie. I mean, that's something that is almost nuanced in the sense that kids who have seen The Lion King or kids who have seen movies where characters have died, it's like, okay, the character's dead. But then, like, you don't see a kids movie that says, this kid got his leg, like, I don't actually know how he lost his leg, but it either got burned off or got broken so bad that they had to cut it off. Something happened to his leg, and it's pretty, like, they deal with it in the movie, and that's, and again, not to an emotional extent, but just to a physical extent, what they deal with is pretty intense in some ways. So I think from both of us, it's an extremely strong recommendation. If you haven't seen How to Train Your Dragon, to definitely check it out.
And you should probably stop listening right here also.
Yeah, exactly, because we don't necessarily want to ruin it for you. It's a really enjoyable film, though. I would suggest trying to see it on the biggest screen in the best quality you can. And if you can see it in 3D, like, it's one of the few movies out there that I would 100% recommend watching in 3D if you can. But anyway, that brings us to the sequel, How to Train Your Dragon 2, which came out a week ago, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah, a week ago.
Okay, which was about a week ago. And I've already seen twice, so I think that I did really enjoy the sequel. I really like How to Train Your Dragon 2, and we're going to talk about it right now try to talk about it from a non-spoiler standpoint, so just initial impressions. What did you think?
Okay, this is going to be hard talking about non-spoilers. Well, first off, I'd like to say this is going to be kind of interesting because I don't think that we've actually talked about this yet.
No.
I mean, usually we talk about movies and we have like these rousing discussions, but this is the first time we've actually talked about How to Train Your Dragon.
Exactly.
So, I mean, it'd be unfair to say that I didn't like it. I did like it a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I have some qualms about it, but I mean, overall, I could easily say that I liked it.
Yeah, I would highly recommend it, especially if you liked the first one.
Yeah.
I actually think, and I'm trying to do non-spoilers. I think this is a more emotionally investing and satisfying film than the first one. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of character development and like insight into the film. That is just like thematically, it's very satisfying, the whole film. Yeah. However, I gotta say, I think see that's the thing is that we're talking about this from a non-spoiler standpoint, and I want to discuss it. But I don't want to. It's a really great movie, so I go see it for sure. But I don't expect. I guess don't expect the sense of awe and wonder that you got from the first movie because it is a sequel. So you've already been introduced to everything that's happening. You know that Toothless is like the cutest animal alive, and you already know that you want to own your own dragon. And there's a lot of that in the sequel. Funny.
They follow up with that. The relationship between Toothless and Hiccup is just as good, if not stronger than it was in the first one.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's actually an interesting theme that they explore. It's kind of like a kid's theme where like the relationship between a person and an animal, like a person and their pet, basically, and how that like it can feel like your best friend, but it's still just an animal, you know. So it's an interesting theme. Again, I don't want to spoil anything.
But it's really too bad that you can't see us with all our hand gestures right now.
Exactly,
it's much more entertaining.
But what I think as far as the emotion and the theme and the actual story goes, I think it's very strong. I just don't know that the action set pieces and that sense of awe is as strong as the first film was.
I have some things to talk about that, and we can talk about that in
spoilers.
Yeah,
when we talk to
it honestly might be difficult to talk about this movie without spoilers too much.
Because there's 40 minutes into the movie, there's a lot of spoilers, and that's the other thing too. I would highly recommend not checking out the trailers if you've been able to avoid them at this point, because there's cool stuff that happens in the movie that if you haven't seen the trailers will probably be cooler. And I'm sure a lot of people who have seen the trailers know what we're talking about, but I think the marketing could have been better on this movie.
Maybe a little bit.
I want to talk real quick though about the humor, which isn't really a spoiler.
Okay.
But it's funny because a lot of the cute animal stuff, while you were getting introduced to Hiccup in the first film and all the different types of dragons, a lot of that sort of came to the forefront because it was pertinent to the story. What they did in this movie,
in terms of like introducing like the different dragons and stuff?
Yeah, okay. Exactly. So like when Toothless is rolling around in the grass, or when he's faking like drawing a picture because Hiccup's drawing a picture, like that's all very cute, and you learn how these animals work through it.
Yeah,
it's interesting that type of humor, while it's still present, is literally pushed to the background in this movie. Like, there's the scene in the beginning where Astrid and Hiccup are talking, and their two dragons are interacting, and they're like chasing each other behind Astrid and Hiccup while they're having a dialogue.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that because it helps the story move along, because this story isn't about introducing those.
It's very strongly a sequel. It builds upon what knows the foundations that the first one made, and it's doing different things.
Yeah, and again, something else slightly non-spoilerific. I really appreciated how in the movie, I feel like it's a cliche in a lot of sequels, whether it's a comedy or an action or whatever, that two of the characters who are in a relationship at the end of the first movie have found some weird problem that they have to deal with in the second movie. And what I really appreciated about the sequel is that Astrid and Hiccup don't have that issue.
Yep.
They're just like a good couple who like love each other and are like totally like, yeah, woo!
Or the other problem you run into is like they revert to like where they were at the beginning of the first film.
Exactly.
Like, we have to go through this again.
Exactly. And they totally didn't. And that just speaks, I think, more to the film building on itself. Building on what the first movie set up, and not just being like another submission in what's going to be 30 films, but a sequel that actually progresses.
Yeah.
So
yeah, that's definitely a strong point.
And I guess the movie that I think of to sort of compare, a movie that I think it's compared to is like in the Ice Age movies, which Ethan is not particularly fond of. I am aware. Like the characters pretty much stay the same throughout. Like Sid the Sloth is always the same. The saber-toothed tiger, while he has a character arc in the first one, I can't even remember, Diego, I guess is his name. I feel like in like the third movie, he like went back, and I don't know. Either way, they always seem to stay sort of static as opposed to clearly progressing.
I mean, and that works kind of for those movies because
right.
they're humorous and those characters are funny the way they are. You don't really want them to change.
Exactly.
At least too significant.
But that's kind of what makes How to Train Your Dragon feel like a movie that might be for slightly older audiences as well.
That's a really good point. Just that extra element of storytelling, I guess, that would separate it from something like Ice Age.
Yeah,
honestly, because that is one of the reasons I dislike Ice Age, because Paul got but yeah, I have something. The first thing that I noticed when I was watching the movie is the acting. In terms of like the characters and the animation, DreamWorks really pushed the way they animated the characters. They Hiccup, and like there's that conversation that they have Hiccup and Astrid right at the beginning.
Oh yeah, where she's making fun of how he like acts.
Yeah, and it's like I don't think I've ever seen like that level of acting in an animated film before, and that really blew my mind. In terms
where the character has like specific movements that he does, and
or just like the personality that they've given him, and like the how full, like how real they made that character.
Yeah,
I mean, it almost was like too real, like pushing it in the direction of being like creepy. You know, the uncanny valley, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's actually kind of funny because I thought, like, while she was making fun of him and doing all the things, I was like, yeah, that is totally like it. Wait, these are animated characters. That was sort of something that went through my head. Like, it's just funny, but it's a little like, I agree. Yeah. There's that uncanny factor. Like, it's a little off-putting, almost how real they are. Mm-hmm. Not in a way that I think detracts from the story, but in a way that if you think about it, is like, that's really interesting.
I think that like DreamWorks more than anything has pushed the level of giving a personality or a personality to an animated character like this. I mean, there's never a moment there I was like, oh yeah, this is some pixels on a computer. He was a character from the moment he stepped on screen.
Yeah,
all the characters were.
That's true. No, that's very true. And even down to the different, especially in this movie, the different, since you're introduced to so many of them, everybody's different dragons. They all have different personalities too. From Toothless to, what is Astrid's dragon name? I don't know. Like, anyway, but to her dragon, like, and you can also sort of tell they all have somewhat different levels of intelligence. Yeah. Just like the humans.
Gobber's massive, like, fat dragon.
Yeah, exactly. So, that's really interesting. Because you can totally, it almost makes it, the side characters are almost stronger in that way. Mm-hmm. So we got to get into spoilers at some point. This conversation might go on much longer than we expected. But the other thing that I found really funny, and maybe I should say this for spoilers, but there's a recurring joke in the movie between Tough Nut. Is it Tough Nut? Who's the girl?
Oh yeah.
And and one of the new characters in the movie named Eret, son of Eret, and there's something about that joke, that recurring joke. That just made me, and it wasn't even necessarily the joke, because the joke is kind of cliche. It was the way they played the joke, the way that Tough Nut reacts to all of it. It was just situations. Some of the one-liners from her were like probably the highlight of comic relief in the movie, other than of course Toothless being adorable.
The dork.
Yeah. So anyway, I think that's gonna sum it up for non-spoiler stuff.
Yeah, I think we better go into spoilers now, just to be safe here.
Yeah. So from this point forward, if you have not seen How to Train Your Dragon 2,
which if you haven't, you should rectify this immediately.
Yes, definitely. If you haven't seen How to Train Your Dragon 2, you should either just go to our website and check out more of our podcasts, the-letterbox.com. You can skip to the end to hear this again. Or not, that'd be weird. But anyway, check us out. From this point forward, we'll be talking about spoilers and plot details for How to Train Your Dragon 2, so you've been warned. So, what is the first spoiler that you want to talk about?
Oh, boy. There's so many of them. I mean, they definitely had a lot of... let's just talk about, in terms of, the story being more personal. Like, we were introduced to Hiccup's mom.
Right.
And then subsequently de-introduced to his father.
Right. Yeah, which is, oh man, okay. So let me I gotta get it out. The stuff between Hiccup's mom and dad has been a lot of critics, or not really a lot of critics. One critic in particular that I can think of, has sort of written off that setup and that relationship as not being realistic, because what happens is Hiccup's mother gets reintroduced and revealed to not have been dead. And this specific critic is complaining about how Hiccup and Stoic, Hiccup's dad, seem totally okay with it. But this is my thing. First of all, this is like the first few hours that they are reintroduced to her.
That's true. I didn't think about that. Like, it really has been the movie only spans a couple of days.
Exactly. So the movie, it's literally the whole movie is almost like at most 48 hours
from the moment like Stoic gets reintroduced to Valka to the moment where he is killed.
Yeah, that's like 4 hours.
Yeah, really.
And so the initial, what you're seeing in the movie is the initial like reveal of her being still alive. And so there's obviously a ton of emotional fallout from a realistic standpoint that would come from that. But
is it necessary to see in these few hours?
And I don't think it is, given the way that Stoic reacts to seeing her. Given the way Hiccup is confused at first, but then ultimately happy that his mom's back, which is, I think, a reasonable response.
Yeah.
For a 20-year-old male who thinks his mom's been dead his whole life. And then Stoic is just so clearly like those scenes between Stoic and Valka like brought me to tears, like, because they're just so beautifully done that they're just really powerful. And I totally believed, from an animated, ridiculous looking like large Viking, that he was just madly in love with this woman. And I like that. I think that was done really, really well. What might not have been done too well is the initial moments of Stoic's death.
Yeah, I agree. And there's definitely something that like I felt was a little missing from Hiccup's reaction to Stoic's death.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of like, I mean, there's that great scene with the boat when they're setting it on fire. But in terms of Hiccup's like emotional fallout from that, like, it didn't seem to be as I guess cinched or followed through as much.
Yeah,
I wish I could have seen a little bit more of like him dealing with that.
And while I'm watching the movie, my rationale is he doesn't have time to deal with it in the.
I mean, yeah,
but I agree.
But a scene with Astrid or something like comforting him would have
been good. Just like an extended scene.
Yeah.
Because there is that scene with the boat where his mom talks to him and is like, you are your father's son, basically.
Yeah.
Which is another great, like, man, this movie, I'm telling you, from those scenes to the finale, like, there's a lot of, to me, like, just like heart-wrenching stuff. I teared up more times in this movie than I did in The Fault in Our Stars, which maybe just makes me heartless, but so that kind of leads us into something else. The scene, the way they set up. So this is a big spoiler. So if you really haven't seen the movie and you're planning on it, don't listen to this part, because it's kind of shocking, and I'm really surprised they did it. The fact that Toothless is the one who kills Stoic was just like,
yeah.
Like in my brain, I was just like, I can't believe they just took one of the most lovable characters of any film and turned him against like Hiccup's dad.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that was intense, and I think like the way they set it up was, obviously it's all very sort of fantastical, but it was well executed, and then the fallout from that, I think, was pretty well executed too.
Yeah, in terms of him, like, with his relationship with Toothless after that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I would agree.
Like the way they sort of dealt with that, and the way Hiccup sort of had to come, realize that, yes, Toothless might be his best friend, but he is also an animal.
It's interesting because they set up Toothless in the first film as the most dangerous of the dragons, and he's gonna, if you see a Night Fury, you're dead for sure. But in the first film, we really don't see all that much of Toothless being a dangerous, monster animal.
Right.
Which I think we get to see a little bit more of that in this film. Maybe not much more, but
I think. Well, I actually think we do get to see that, especially. First of all, in the fact that he kills Stoic.
I guess also, and then in the ending. There.
And in the end, you realize sort of how much power Toothless actually has that he doesn't even realize he has. The scene where he figures out that he can switch his switch the what do you call them, the ridges on his back.
Yeah.
He can split them open, and he's so excited about it. He's showing it off. Anyway.
That's such a great.
He's just,
again, the personality of these animals, this character, is just ridiculously shown.
And the interaction with Valka's dragon too is pretty great. And that's what I was talking about too. Is Valka's dragon? I'm sure. First of all, a very interesting designed.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say that.
Let's
talk about the designs of the dragons in number 1 versus the designs of the dragons in number 2.
Okay.
The dragons in number 1 are just these ridiculous. They've got these big bulging eyes, and you're like, what is this?
Yeah,
thing?
exactly. And those the crazy long, the one who sets himself on fire, insanely long neck, just sort of ridiculous looking.
What is this? I mean, it's Dreamer, and that's kind of what Dreamers have set up for themselves.
Right.
So it makes sense in their visual style.
Right.
But then we get to number 2, and all of a sudden these dragons are actually cool.
Yeah, Valka's dragon has 4 wings, and just sort of this awesome kind of. I don't know how to describe it. It's almost like a pit bull-esque face for a dragon, and it's funny too because Toothless is clearly you find out in the movie that he's the same age as Hiccup, or at least about the same age. And he's sort of obviously immature and an immature animal, so to speak. And then Valka's dragon, Cloudjumper. I'm surprised I'm remembering these.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
Is this very sort of regal animal, and it's funny these animals, they give these animals characteristics and personalities that make them feel like characters, for sure.
Valka has that line when she's talking to Stoic, how they're intelligent or something like that. So,
yeah.
I think it'd be fair to call them characters.
Yeah. And I don't think they ever bring them to the point of saying that they're, intelligent in the same way that, human beings are, but they do imply that they are, that they clearly have personality.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's another character I wanted to talk about. Valka is actually, when she's introduced, she's introduced as this woman who's been living with dragons for 20 years, and I totally believe it because she is kind of weird.
It's actually interesting because what I was talking about earlier with the characters being overly, almost overly realistic and almost reaching a kind of
an uncanny
the uncanny valley.
Yeah.
Valka is actually the one character that I totally bought the entire. She was almost scarily real. Just
that's what I mean. Is they gave her little sort of little things and little responses. She sort of laughs at sort of odd times and has this way of talking that's very much I've lived in the earth for so long, I don't know how to interact with people. She's got that air about her where you totally, and it's a little weird and it makes you feel a little uncomfortable, but I think it's because you're supposed to. I think that's very much on purpose. Which is I just think a testament to the filmmakers having each of these characters so well thought out. But there's something else I wanted to say about her. I honestly I was so sad that Stoic died because I honestly wanted to see more
of their relationship.
Yeah.
Valka and Stoic. Yeah.
I'm not by any means disappointed that we only get Valka in the next movie. I think she's a very interesting character as well.
And that'll be interesting to see, like, the relationship, I guess, of because Hiccup in the film has qualms about taking the leadership of the village of Burke.
Yeah, that's actually the whole thematic setup of the movie.
Yeah.
Is that
by the way?
Yeah, but it's just by the way. We never did like a synopsis of the movie.
We should probably pull out a little bit just to talk about it in general.
So so basically the whole 30 minutes into talking about this movie, and now we're doing this. The whole setup of the movie is that Hiccup has been asked by his father to take on the chief position for their village, on the island of Burke. And
if you didn't know,
right? And Hiccup doesn't want to because he doesn't think he's supposed to be a chief, and so he's off like mapping all these different lands and
doing adventuring stuff.
Right, and he comes upon these dragon trappers who are working for a guy who's building a dragon army, and then he comes back, and his dad knows the guy who's building the dragon army, and so all this stuff goes down. And
Drago Bloodfist.
Yeah, Drago Bloodfist. I thought it was Bloodfist.
I thought it was Bloodfist, too. Wikipedia says Bloodfist.
So Hiccup tries to go talk to Bloodfist, and in the meantime meets his mother while he's out on this journey. And his mother has been living with dragons that are controlled by this alpha dragon, which is basically just like the Godzilla of dragons, and that can control all the dragons around it. And this one is good, but we find out in the course of the movie that Drago Bloodfist controls another alpha that is bad.
That like equal power.
Equal power. And then this is sort of where we start to get into spoilers. Drago Bloodfist has his alpha kill basically Valka's alpha.
Starting to get into spoilers.
Yeah, exactly. Kills Valka's alpha and then turns Hiccup. Takes control of Toothless and turns Toothless against Stoic. Because the alpha can control, like I said, the dragons around it. So he basically steals all the dragons, except the babies, which is how they get back to Burke.
Yeah.
And then they go back to Burke, and Toothless or Hiccup is able, through their bond of friendship, to take... That sounds really cheesy, but it's much more...
the power of love.
Exactly. It's much more compelling in the film. But the... basically takes control of Toothless, and then Toothless challenges... That's probably the coolest scene in the movie. And it's not even an action scene, really. It's just you find out that Toothless can glow blue, which is awesome, and challenges the alpha.
And it's cooler than Godzilla.
Exactly. Challenges the alpha, and basically, he doesn't actually take him down, really.
He just kind of, like,
overpowers him.
Yeah.
And so then Toothless becomes the alpha of all the dragons around him, and and Hiccup ends up accepting his role as chief, recognizing his different. That's what's so, I guess, emotionally satisfying, is that he's able to recognize that his qualities, while they might not be the same as his dad's, are valuable qualities in leading the village.
Cue the credits.
Exactly. So that's the summary. Sorry we got so long to get to it, but that's. Again, like I feel like this movie, more than anything else, like emotionally and thematically are its strongest points. Emotionally, thematically, and its world building.
Yeah. So this movie is definitely a lot more personal than the first one. Whereas the first one was almost like full in the sense of full of awe,
not as in bad.
This one is a lot more personal and small, close to the characters in dealing with their kind of relationships and emotional journey, which is interesting because that's the awe and the wonder is kind of what set the first one apart. So this is kind of an interesting sequel that kind of what we're moving forward. We're going into these characters a little bit deeper. This is what our story is about, not that.
And I think there is still plenty of action and flight scenes and stuff like that are great. That opening fight scene with Hiccup is excellent.
Yeah, it's not that like there definitely is that like those kind of those fight scenes. It's interesting because I mean the credits rolled. I mean I don't know if you've seen the movie, you'll know that the credits are set over concept art of the film,
which is beautiful.
And more films should do that.
Yeah,
but. The concept art has this sense of scale and awe and wonder, and it wasn't until that moment that I was like, "Wow, I've kind of been missing this the entire film." Like there wasn't that like we never really pulled out and saw like the scale of things.
Yeah,
which was kind of interesting. It's not necessarily like it's a bad thing that it's missing because we are a lot more personally connected with these characters,
right?
But I feel like we never got that scale.
That we got from the first one.
Yeah, and I feel like to compensate for that, some of the fight scenes are almost like flashy, like there's explosions and stuff, and they've got like all these colors and like all these like explosions. And I think that's what you're kind of talking about with you mentioned the action scenes being a little bit of a disappointment,
right?
Especially coming from the first one,
because I think that's accurate to say they're almost less pure. Like you're not just getting the thrill of flying with like in the environment that you're in. You're getting, except I think for that first fight scene, you're getting the sense of flying while having to dodge a bunch of things and like that. Yeah, especially the battle scene at the end of the second act. That's the big like action set piece, because I don't know that you call the last one the big action set piece, and it's just not as compelling as the finale in the first one, or even the test drive scene in the first one. The finale in the first one, where Astrid's fall, like that moment where Hiccup comes out of the water, or gets on Toothless, and then Astrid's falling through the air.
Yeah,
Astrid's falling through the air, and then he's like, you think she's gonna die, and then Hiccup's like, "Did you get her to Toothless?" And he like looks down, and there she is, and you're just like, "Oh my gosh, I can't stand it!" Like you just get like crazy chills while watching the movie. That's not there in the second one to the same extent, which I think is a flaw in the movie. But that doesn't mean that I don't think this movie is great too.
No, I mean, I don't think that it's not necessarily like missing it. I mean, the problem is that I mean, it's not without that. It's not really. It doesn't really have anything to separate itself from other animated films today. I mean, other than being a great sequel.
Right.
There's nothing like it. Definitely loses that kind of like the thing that made How to Train Your Dragon 1 so unique about film, like in the animated film industry today, and it is a great sequel. But I wish that it had just a little bit more of that wonder, like that excitement.
Yeah, I think if I don't know that I'm hoping they'll make a third one. They have
such a great opportunity, like to make something like them running into something that like some kind of like a dragon or a power that they've never like experienced before. That's like utterly debunking everything. Like there's a really cool opportunity for them to go back to that.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting too, because I actually think another like minor weak point in this film is I think the villain was a little weak. And it's funny because the first one doesn't really have a villain. It's got the bad alpha.
Yeah.
But
they call it an alpha?
No, they don't call it an alpha because they don't know anything about dragons.
Okay.
But so in this one, the bad guy I think is just a little sort of one note.
Yeah.
And he's not really even introduced until halfway through the movie. You just know about his name.
Guys, we need a bad guy here. What should we put here?
Exactly. So that's, I think, a weak point in the movie. But anyway, moving on, I think this is just going to be the last thing we talk about. One of the best things I think we can agree on about the first movie, besides the visuals, was the soundtrack.
Oh man!
It's John Powell, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe it's John Powell who does the soundtrack to the first How to Train Your Dragon, and it is incredible. If you have not listened to it and you haven't seen the movie, just listen to the soundtrack, and I think it will make you want to see the movie.
Yeah.
And it's incredible. It's just a beautiful soundtrack. How do you think the second movie soundtrack held up to this first one?
So I'll tell you exactly what happened here. The soundtrack came out on Wednesday, the day before the movie came out, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I pulled it up on Spotify, I listened to it, and about halfway through the soundtrack, there was this moment where I was just like, I'm going to cry during this part of the movie. And I totally did.
Yeah, that's... I actually I stopped listening to the soundtrack when it first came out because I was like, I was at work and I was like, I can't deal with this right now. I can't, I have to wait till I actually see the movie because I don't want, I think the second soundtrack, as much as the second movie is a great sequel, I think the second soundtrack is
almost a better sequel
in
terms of soundtrack.
Yeah,
they definitely, one of the things that always frustrates me about sequel soundtracks is how they kind of just they do one of two things. They either just completely reuse all the themes from the first one, or they rely on the themes that they had from the first one, and they just they make these meaningless kind of things to fill in the gaps between those things.
Yeah, or maybe they add one new theme that only gets used twice.
Yeah.
This movie introduces sort of a whole new theme that gets woven into the old theme, which is pretty much the best metaphor for a sequel ever.
Yeah, basically.
All of the themes surrounding Valka and Stoic, I think, are woven nicely into the rest of the movie.
Yeah, and you never lose sight of the themes that you had from the first one. They're always present, but they never overpower or are underpowered by themes that you have for the second one. So it's just very well written. So good job, John Powell.
Yeah. So I think that's going to conclude our discussion of How to Train Your Dragon 2. You can tune in next week. I have to talk to my other co-hosts, Nick and Joe, about what we're going to talk about next week. I don't know if Transformers comes out next week, but I hope that's not what we talk about. But anyway, Ethan, where can people find you online? Anywhere? Or are you not really
honest,
present?
I don't really have a Twitter. I have, it's
website.
I mean,
Tumblr, anything?
Not really.
So Ethan is basically an artist and doesn't like to advertise himself. But
I'm sorry.
It's all right. But anyway, at some point down the line, I'm sure you'll hear of Ethan Snell. But you can find more of our articles and news from the Letterbox at the-letterbox.com. Again, you can find this podcast on iTunes or on our website. And you can follow me, Paul Duda, at PFDuda on Twitter. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week. 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 See you next week.